This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
Today was one of the most important days in the NHL draft process as we saw a lot of Russian and European players skating together in one rink in South Florida. And this was really important for a lot of reasons. Firstly, this was the first time NHL teams were actually able to speak to Demidov because he wasn't at the NHL Combine. And with a week to go until the NHL draft, it seems like Demidov's stock has dramatically changed, and we're starting to hear a lot about him as a person, as a player, how he's performed, and most importantly, how NHL teams are starting to see him. So, what are these big details that we need to talk about today on Ivan Demidov? Where could he actually go on draft day? And what are the latest rumors surrounding him? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through every single little bit of juicy details. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we lead up to the draft. It's getting so close and you won't want to miss a thing. And NHL teams today are finally going to be able to get a look at this player as a person as well to determine what he could be in the future. And as you get this tweet by Sean Shapiro talking about it, Ivan Demidov is here in Florida, and you can see he's there at practice, he's there in North America, and this was the best opportunity for Demidov to really showcase himself. As Frank Savalima mentioned, Kyle Davidson, Pat Verbeek, Craig Conroy among the observers to watch top prospects in Demidov, Levshunov, Porek, and more. And folks, we got so much to sink our teeth into. From Cam Robinson talking to an NHL exec about Demidov this morning, he said, "I'm glad I don't have to decide to pick him second, but he's that good. You drop him in the OHL and he's destroying that league. Not his fault he was stuck in Russian juniors. He'll be signed and in the NHL by next spring." And honestly, I completely agree with this NHL exec. I mean, I think in the OHL or really any junior league out there, he would have still been Ivan Demidov. He would have still been absolutely insane. You can make the argument that in the NHL, AHL, KHL even, that he might have struggled a little bit, and I do agree, but he's still incredibly young and is more of a finesse player and still rounding out into his physicality and still apparently growing. And then Cam Robinson continues to talk about Demidov, and here is where things get really interesting because there have been the question marks about the Russian contract factor, even though nobody mentions that with Anton Silayev for some reason. And as Cameron Robinson tweets out, the very loud buzz is that Demidov will play out his KHL season in 2025 and then sign his NHL deal at the end of the playoffs. Depending on timing, he should be ready to cross over and end the NHL regular season. And this is huge. And I'm glad we're finally getting talk about this because I just hate all these contract discussions and really all of this surrounding Demidov because he doesn't deserve that. This is something that he has abundantly continued to make clear, and it looks like he wants to come to the NHL as soon as his contract is over, which you love to see. And I think just like Michkov, once he has another full year in Russia, once he's drafted, he could be NHL ready. I think Demidov would still have some growing pains, sure, but I think having that pro competition would be excellent for Demidov and exactly what he needs. If that does happen, if he does play a full KHL season, I think he's going to be brilliant, just like Michkov was this last year and prove a lot of people wrong. This whole argument about Ivan Demidov and his contract situation is just silly to me. I mean, we're seeing it with Michkov, how he's almost signing in the NHL already, and even if he stays for another year, he's probably going to come after next season. In Demidov's case, let's say for argument's sake, he signs for 2 more years after this and stays out of North America for 3 seasons. Is that really going to be that much more different from Kane Lindstrom or a Beckett Seneca? And I love Kane Lindstrom. He's 3rd in my draft rankings, but I think he's at least 2 years away from being an NHL regular, maybe even 3 if it's like the Quinton Byfield route where that raw potential just needs more time to refine itself at the pro level. Beckett Seneca could be the exact same way. I mean, he's still kind of a little bit loosey-goosey with his frame right now, and that's at the OHL level. To me, I could absolutely see him taking 3 years to get into the NHL level. TJ Ginla might maybe take 2 because I think he has a lot of pro habits and maybe he's able to accelerate how early he is in the NHL level, but still, he's extremely young and could take some more time. To me, this is the thing is that I feel like especially if you're in a rebuilding mode and especially in a position to draft Demidov, if you're patient whatsoever, having him outside for that type of time just doesn't really matter, especially if you could get the type of player that Demidov could be. And now it might not even be an issue. He might be in the NHL after next season, which would be ideal to me. You'd have him another year, hopefully in the KHL to get some pro experience, and then after that he can take that jump into the NHL level, maybe even get some AHL seasoning here and there. Who knows what happens, but to me that would be perfect. And now there's really no doubt that he's going to come over and be the player you need him to be. And then we go on to he's taller than expected, and here is where things get interesting. We go on to Dan Milstein, who of course is Ivan Demidov's agent. He says Demidov today at 6'1", but official NHL Central scouting measurements are on Thursday. And you can see from Elite Prospects, also from the last NHL Central Scouting ranking, they listed him at 5'11", 168 pounds. But if he's 6'1", if he's added some muscle, that's gonna turn some heads in the NHL. Sure, is it a Beckett Seneca type growth where he goes from like 5'10" to 6'2"? No, but in Demidov's case, that could really be a big riser for some teams. Specifically, I would say for the Anaheim Ducks, who like to draft big, they like to go for these bigger players. In Demidov's case, that could maybe sway them to take a chance. Now, of course, this is Ivan Demidov's agent saying this, so it's probably a little bit inflated. He's probably like 6'3", whatever you want to do. But even so, I mean, the fact that he's still growing and had grown a little bit since the last measurement is a good sign. To me, I don't really have much of an issue with Demidov's height. To me, the bigger question is how he's going to adapt to the physical bruising pressure that he is going to face at the NHL level. That, to me, is maybe the biggest question mark. Because he's a couple of inches higher, that's not really going to sway that too much, but maybe for NHL teams, they look at it differently. But now I think with everything here listed as 5'10", being 6'1" in person, speaking English well, no interest in re-signing in Russia, confident he'll be in the NHL by the end of the KHL playoffs and will be on SKA's KHL roster next season. All of these different things just raise his stock little by little. I think one of these things would have raised his stock a little bit too, but all of these things in conjunction just do so much to propel Demidov. And honestly, there was the talk about Levshunov being the for sure favorite to Chicago at second overall. Now I'm not too sure. Now we're going to talk about the implications of all this with Demidov, where he could go in this draft now, especially considering Chicago, Anaheim, and more. But first, I want to talk to you guys about today's sponsor in BetUS. Of course, we have a series now between the Oilers and the Panthers, but I think in Game 5, just like in the NBA, we're going to see the home team of the Panthers get it done. Right now, it's minus 145 on the money line, but I'm also going to go under 5.5 goals in the game. Going to put $10 down to win, or $5 down to win 10, and we'll see what happens there. But also on the other side, you got a lot of different options here. If you're still on the Oilers train to come back, they're plus 750 on the money line to go back in this series and win it. You can also go through, again, the most goals in the series, most points as well, if you still want to do that. You also got the Conn Smythe too, and honestly, Barkov at plus 105, especially considering Bobrovsky's really poor Game 4, it might tip the scales a little bit. And then also, if you want to make picks on next year's Stanley Cup winner already, you have all the betting odds on BetUS. It's a great time to get started and to sign up today, and thank you so much to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now, I wanted to talk about Demidov and his fit potential with the Chicago Blackhawks, because we got another tweet here by Ovi recapping some tweets here, but also from an article here, and it says the Blackhawks are planning on doing the same thing this week with Demidov, with plans as of Tuesday morning for Chicago and Demidov to have dinner that evening, according to his agent Dan Milstein. And I've heard some rumblings. Obviously, don't take me for an insider or anything, but I've heard that Kyle Davidson specifically has really zeroed in on Demidov and wants him to be the second overall pick for Chicago. But there are other people within the organization that are more on the Artyom Levshunov train. But I think the big thing will be if that height is something that changes their minds. If, of course, speaking English and coming over early will also be something that changes their minds. If they're already on board for the player, then all of these other off-ice things and question marks about the size will have been answered by this whole meeting. Now, and honestly, comparing the two players between Demidov and Levshunov, obviously I come out on top with preferring Demidov, but you see the puck skills, I give it A+ Demidov, Levshunov a B-. To me, Demidov's puck skills are truly unprecedented. I mean, it's insanity just how good he is with his hands, how good his handling is in every single situation. He can do anything he wants with the puck. He's just a wizard in that way. But I would say Levshunov is still pretty good at that. I would say the skating is a pretty obvious upgrade in Levshunov's case. He is just a blissful skater. It's so natural, so fluid, and that's going to aid him in a lot of ways going forward. With Demidov, it's not his strength, but I would still say it's pretty solid. You have the hockey IQ side, where I think Demidov does get the edge. I think he's really good at precision, at knowing when to jump up on the ice, knowing when to make passes, knowing just the timing of the game. He's really precise at that, and I think that's one of the biggest things for him going forward. In Levshunov's case, it's one of the big weaknesses. To me, there are times where he just goes up in the play for no reason, especially when it's bad timing. He's just really raw, let's say, in his decision making, especially when he's pushing up the ice, especially when he's trying to go for physical plays. He can sometimes really miscalculate when to go for physical pressure, and that's something that, even though he has great tools, can be a pretty big issue. I think shooting, they're both pretty good at it. Levshunov has a bomb. In Demidov's case, I think he has a bomb, and his precision is quite good as well. It's not incredible. It's not at a perfect level for either of these two, but still pretty good for me. On the passing side, Demidov is just electric. He can do anything he wants with the puck. The sauce, the precision, especially in speed and in tight. He's so good at feeding teammates, and that's going to be huge. And Levshunov's also pretty good at it, especially when he has a little bit more time. He has some great passing ability, and especially on the blue line, has some great ability to thread the needle, to get pucks in the net, and create for his teammates around the net too. And that's really big too as well. I would say defensively, both of these players aren't too great. I would say Levshunov definitely improved in the second half, but honestly, first half Levshunov had some baffling moments. I mean, times where I didn't even think he was close to the NCAA, but he's somebody that I think was able to improve in time with his skating, being a little bit more careful in when he was able to push up, and being a little more just considerate of his own net, of the slot, of really utilizing his own space. And it did improve. I think it will continue to improve, but I don't think it'll ever be an incredible strength unless he really turns his whole game around. Then you got the physicality, which was a huge point of contention with the second overall pick, especially when you compare these two. And I would say Levshunov absolutely does have the edge, especially with the physical tools. His tools would honestly be an A++. He is so good at using his skating, and when he is able to assert physical pressure, he is so good at getting under the puck, creating opposition, and just making life difficult. But I do think there are still times where he can miscalculate his positioning, miscalculate where he needs to be on the ice, especially against the Russian defending along the boards. But he's someone that I think has the tools to be a great physical player, even at the NHL level. In Demidov's case, again, I don't think it'll ever be a strength like Levshunov's defensive play, but I do think he can get by. He is pretty good at anticipating physical pressure. Once he reaches the NHL, though, in the pro level, that will be obviously something to adjust to. Demidov is never going to be this incredible power forward, but that's not where you're drafting him to be. You're drafting him for that puck skill, for the hockey IQ, for the shooting with the offensive ability, all wrapped up in one pretty tight bow. And we know after the lottery, even though there was some immediate thoughts of Demidov potentially being the pick, we started to hear soon after that Levshunov was the favorite to be drafted second overall by Chicago, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm not going to say that Levshunov couldn't be a second overall worthy player. He's number 5 on my board, but I could see with the potential, with the growth he's already had in the past year, how Chicago would love a player like that on the back end. I think if you asked Chicago a couple weeks ago if they were on the clock a couple weeks back, they would have selected Artyom Levshunov without really thinking and looking back. To me, I think now, though, it becomes a real discussion with that organization, even more so than it was before. I think with how Demidov has grown, how he's proven himself at this meeting to also be a good speaker, to be somebody confident in the Blackhawks organization, to me, I think this will really change things and really dramatically raise Demidov's stock. Even if he doesn't end up getting drafted second overall, to me, there is no chance now that he goes outside the top 5. And I mentioned this on this channel as well, and I think it relates to Chicago's draft pick especially well. I am almost all the time best player available. And in Chicago's case, I think Demidov would be absolutely incredible. Alongside Bedard, those would be maybe the best duo in the league behind McDavid and Draisaitl. And to me, that option, that future is just too tantalizing to mess around with. And sure, I think for Chicago, Levshunov, I still think would be a great pick. He, to me, is somebody that wouldn't change the franchise as much as Demidov could. If he's able to learn his potential, if he's able to get there, to me, he could be just as talented as a Connor Bedard, just as skilled as a Bedard. And that, to me, is the difference maker. This isn't just some pretty good forward coming up. Demidov could be really special and something that Chicago might regret passing up on. But there is something to be said about the draft qualities and also looking in the future. And for Chicago, I don't think they're going to be very good next year, no matter who they pick. So especially considering next year's draft is pretty great, especially in terms of the power forwards available, Chicago could still say, we'll go for Levshunov this year and pick a top end forward next year. But also, I think we're kind of underrating the defensive crop of next year. It's not as good as this, I would say, but Logan Hensler is probably a likely top 3 pick next year. He's somebody that, as a Badger commit, is really special with the skating, with the aggressiveness, with the overall game. Matthew Schaefer is somebody that had a solid OHL rookie season, was brilliant at the U18 World Juniors for Canada, and is one of the younger players of that draft class with his September birthday. I also still like Luka Radivojevic, who in Slovakia has had some great things playing in Sweden, and also at the World Juniors, both the U20 and the U18 levels, has also had some great performances. To me, next year's crop, although it's not as good, there would still be defensive options for Chicago to crave, to want, and to me, it's just too good an opportunity to pass up on Demidov. Demidov. Don't get these opportunities too often. And in Chicago's case, they might be improved next year. They might not have a top 3 pick. Those are some things to maybe consider. And to me, I think in Chicago's case, you can only really bet on what you have in front of you. And in Demidov's case, what you have in front of you is a pretty fantastic prospect. We just look at the NHL draft order this year, and I would say still most likely Demidov is probably going to be available after Chicago. I still think it's most likely Levshunov, but I think it's a lot more 50-50 than it maybe was a little while ago. But I still think it goes Celebrini, likely Levshunov at 2. I still think Anaheim is more likely to go for a D just with what they've drafted. Silayev, I still think makes a ton of sense for them, or even a Caden Lindstrom with what they prioritize. They love their power forwards, they love their big boys, and in Lindstrom's case, there's really no question marks. He's going to be able to handle that physical pressure because he is the physical pressure. And if that is how the draft goes, where it's Celebrini, Levshunov, then Lindstrom number 3, I could absolutely see Columbus just going for the top end potential in Demidov. They still could go for a D perhaps. I mean, if Silayev is there, I think that could still be an interesting thing for them. But I do think with Dell being hired recently, there might be some decision making that goes on there and a little bit of a changing of the future in Columbus. And Demidov would be so much fun there. If not, though, I think with everything that we've heard, even though there's been a lot of smoke screens and mirrors, I think if Demidov is available at number 5, especially if Lindstrom is gone, Montreal will end up picking him. To me, for Montreal, that would be maybe best case scenario, especially if Lindstrom were to be gone already. You wouldn't have to worry about the guilty conscience if Lindstrom goes on to be something special because he was already drafted earlier. And in Montreal's case, you get the top end scoring, top end offensive potential that I feel like they still need in that prospect pool. If they get Demidov, to me, that really completes the future outlook. Maybe not completely. Maybe they still want to add a middle 6 guy for the future, but Demidov makes it a lot better. But you get what I mean, right? I mean, we were talking about maybe him dropping to Montreal as a sure thing a little while ago, maybe even dropping outside of Montreal, and then Utah might pick a Silayev or a bigger player outside of them, and maybe he drops to Ottawa. There were question marks about where he would end up dropping, but I think now those question marks, those hesitancies are pretty much gone, and I think a top 5 pick is pretty much a lock now. But of course, we'll be making my own mock draft once the Stanley Cup final ends on the channel with the first couple rounds at the very least, so keep up for that, because we're going to be answering who Demidov could go to, and of course, who the Chicago Blackhawks will end up picking. But I cannot wait to see where Demidov ends up going on draft day. This is such an exciting story, and it's great to see him come over to North America and start to show some confidence to scouts as well. But I want to know down below what your guys' thoughts are on all these new details, all the new updates on Demidov. Where do you want to see him go? Where do you think he'll go in the draft? Do you think Chicago should draft him 2nd overall now? I would love to know all your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell if you guys haven't already. It supports the channel a ton, and every bit is appreciated. And click on this card for all of my 2024 draft content in one playlist right for you to binge. So much stuff there, and a lot of stuff coming up as well that you won't want to miss. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. Keep killing it, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.